All right, you all have a handout, 2 handouts that I gave you. And what I'm showing you here, this may not make any sense whatsoever. All right, but this is the run from it. We are actually creating here 10 employees. All right, don't ask me why they were 0, 0, and 0. It's because I did the first 8 and then I thought, oh, I didn't do those other 2. That's why they have the goofy numbering system. All right, so notice that this looks kind of weird. UFN star UFN false 9999. We'll get to what that means. All right, this is what happens when you call what's that blank constructor, when there's nothing in there. This is when you pass everything. You give it a first name, a middle initial, a last name, a union status, an employee number, an hours worked, an hourly rate, and a gross pay. All right, this is another one with everything. But this person gets no overtime. This person gets overtime. This person, if you look up here, doesn't have a first name passed in. UFN means unknown first name. This asterisk means we didn't pass in a middle initial. This means we didn't pass in a last name, unknown last name. This, I put in a bad value in here for an employee number. So I set it to a default. This, I put a bad number in for the hours worked, so it gave me a default. Here I put a bad number in for the hourly rate, so it gave me a default. Now, do I expect you to understand that? No. Do I expect you to remember that? No. But at least it's been shown to you. All right? So, as we spend the next umpteen minutes, whatever umpteen is, all right, that's what we're going to talk about right now. There are 2 files in this program of note. They are employee.cs, which basically, for lack of better words there, all right, that's what an employee is. Yeah, that's 267 lines. You're going to type in about 250 of those. All right, and if you look on the screen, then the program.cs file, that is main. That's when we're creating a bunch of these objects. And that is 150. So that's about 400 lines you have to type in. But I want you to do it. And what I want you to understand when you're doing this, you look up on the screen here, what I want you to do, because it's really tempting to do this. It's really tempting to do this is to sit there and, okay, now I've got all those 267 lines he told us we have to key in. I did all that. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to key in these 157. Now I'm going to run it. No. Key in those 267, then come back and just do this. And then run it. Then add these 2. And then run it. That's how you're going to learn. You have to take my word for it, because if you just smack 10 people in there, it's a lot different than doing it a person at a time. So if you're going, let's just say, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. Then what I do is I put all these in, then I'd come in there and I'd comment out all of them except for the first one, all of them. All of them. And I'd save it and I'd run it. And then all we should get is that first employee if I didn't make any mistakes. There. See what I'm saying? And I would suggest then comment that one out and comment in just the second one. Because that's how you're going to learn the difference between these, in my opinion. Now, that said, I can say that till I'm blue in the face, and some people are going to say, yeah, whatever. And they're going to do whatever the hell they want to do anyway. And I'm not saying that to be mean or whatever to any of you. But, hey, it's human nature, all right, to do that. Some people are just going to say, I'm doing it like this. He's wrong. Well, then you're going to do it that way, all right? But let's forget about main. Main is just our driver. Let's forget about that file for a while. And let's talk about the employee, this big file right here. All right? First thing to realize when you take a look at it, can you all please take a look at the screen right here? Is there anything right here, anything we haven't talked about or that doesn't make sense to you? If you look at the def rate and the def hours, all that means is if we don't put in a rate, it gets the default rate. If we don't put it in hours, it gets the default hours. Does all that make sense? Yes? All right. Because right there, once you got to that point, that's about 10% of the typing you have to do. Okay? Remember to do this. If you this one, we're not printing anything, so we don't need the using statement, but in the other one, remember to add this. Okay? You all will anyway, because if you don't put in that using static system.console, you're going to get an error when you try to put in a write line or a read line. All right. So, what we're saying is we have to check this stuff for every employee. We have to make sure that they've got an employee number between 1,000 and 10,000. If they don't, so if we give them something less than 1,000 or something greater than 10,000, we're just going to reset it to 9999. All right? Every employee has to work between 0 and 84 hours. If we put in a number less than 0 or a number greater than 84, we default it to 40. Every employee must make between $0 and $100 an hour. If they make less than 0 or greater than 100, we default them to 25. Okay? The most hours you can work without getting overtime are 40, and if you have overtime, you get time and a half. That should make sense because we've done that for other programs that we've created. We may not have worked with those defaults. I don't remember if we did or not. But you're all intelligent people. You can all figure out what I just said, I think at least, you know, as far as what I meant with the default values. All right. Then we've got these. Notice it says here, declare program instance variables. That means each time we create an employee, they will have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fields. Each employee will have their own first name, their own middle initial, their own last name, their own union status, their own employee number, their own hours worked, their own hourly rate, and their own gross pay. Now, one thing you may or may not be confused of is when you look at the middle initial. Okay, when I did that, why didn't I make that a char? Just because the way that I wrote the program, it was easier to make it a string. All right? It's very hard when you want to initialize something. You know, you can't pass in, basically. Here's a question. What is this called? 2 double quotes in a row. What's that called? What? What kind of string? Empty string. Okay? You can't do this. There is no empty char. Did you hear me? Technically, you can do this, which is kind of like an empty char. All right? But I thought, you guys really want to see that? Do we want to have this conversation? So I just made it a string. That's the only reason. Okay? All right. So, I'm asking one more time. Anything from here through here that anybody doesn't understand, this is your time to ask. These variables right here, please look on the screen. These variables, they're called instance variables, meaning that each object gets its own copy of them. All right? Notice they're all private. You may or may not remember this from last week, where I said that really object-oriented programming is using public methods to manipulate private data. This is the private data right there. That's the private data. So we're going to have to use our public methods to manipulate our private data. Okay? All right. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of data. Okay? If we pass in nothing, okay, so we create a new employee object and we pass in nothing. Look on the screen, please. Their first name becomes UFN, unknown first name. Their middle initial becomes an asterisk. Their last name becomes ULN, unknown last name. Their union status becomes false. All right? Their employee number becomes the default, which was 9999, I think. All right? The hours worked becomes 40, The hourly rate becomes 25. The gross pay becomes 1,000. 40 times 25. Does that make sense? All right. Why am I telling you that? Because remember, in here, that, for lack of better words, I'm going to comment out this, and this, and this, and this, and all this, and this, all right, and everything that's here. A lot more work than I thought it would be, but it's fine. All right, so I'm going to comment all that out. Why? The only thing that we've got running now is this. Okay? If we look up on the screen here. That's interesting. Okay. I have to put that back. Right here, that's what I wanted. All that out of there. Okay, so I'm creating a brand new employee where I'm passing nothing, right? Would you all agree? Now, I immediately want to do that. I want to immediately print out all that employee's information. So what do we get? That's all the default values. I want to prove it to you. Not that I don't think you don't believe me, but I want to grab all this. So look on the screen if you would. All right, first name, UFN. Middle initial, asterisk. Last name, ULN. Is union, false. Employee number, the default. Hours worked, the default. Hourly rate, the default. This times this is this. All that makes sense? So if we create ourselves an employee, all right? So if we create an employee right here where we pass nothing in to the employee, nothing, that means this constructor right here gets called. And it does all that stuff. All right? So it says first name equals UFN. What that line right there does, if you look on the screen, what that line does, that line right there, that's in blue, line 40, that line goes in and it calls that line. And it checks and it says, hey, if there's nothing in there, set it to this. Otherwise, all right, technically, it's always going to have a value. But it's doing a little bit of validation for us. All right. Then when we come up and do the next one, all right, the middle initial does the same thing. Then the last name does the same thing. Then the union status does the same thing. Then notice we've got an employee number. And I said that basically, for lack of better words, what did we do here? You all know what this is because I've made you do it. I'm validating to make sure there's a number in there. I'm doing a try parse with an int. All right? Then I'm saying if the number that we put in is less than the minimum, which is 1,000, or it's greater than the maximum, which is 10,000, set it to our default. All right? Then we're doing a similar thing with our hours worked, but those are double, so I do a try parse with a double. All right? And this is checking to make sure it's within range. And this one is checking that's within range. Now, I want to show you, if you look on the screen, because this is kind of important here. One of the reasons this is so important. See this right here? Technically, we never have to do that. Because of the fact, notice if I come back in here and, see if I can Control X my way out of here. Hopefully that did it. All right. But if I come back in here, no, I didn't. If I were to come in here and try to create this, and let's say, for example, which one were we just talking about? That's the hours worked. Let's say that I tried to put in something illegal for hours worked. All right, right here. If I come through here and I try to set it to the empty string. See how I get an error? Right now, if I put anything into that field other than a double, other than a number, it's not going to work. I could put a negative number in there. I could put in this. But now our code's handling that. So what I'm telling you is by creating object-oriented programs like this, technically, this isn't needed. All right? Now, I'm going to tell you a very quick story you probably won't give a damn about, but there's a moral behind the story. All right? Would you all agree that what we talked about, geez, this was a month, 2 months ago. Remember when we learned about the switch statement? Remember that? And I said it's another way of writing an if with a bunch of else ifs, and then at the end you put a default in there. Okay? Well, the reason I'm telling you this is back in the day, and I'm not making this up, all right? And maybe I've told you already. If I have, sorry. But back in the day when I was working at AT&T, we used to write switch statements that sometimes were hundreds of lines long. And I'm not exaggerating because you know what? They were sometimes thousands of lines long. We had that many cases that we had to check. All right? This was back in the day. You didn't have one of these. You had an old rotary phone, and you wanted to pick it up and get dial tone 24 hours a day. All right? So there was one of these really long switch statements. Okay? And at the end, what the person should have done is they should have put in this. Which meant, if you ever get into this situation, get the hell out of this routine. Does that make sense? That's all it means. They didn't put it in. They tracked down, it wasn't me, they tracked down the guy who did it. Okay? And they said, why didn't you put that in? And he said, because it'll never happen. And guess what? It happened. It happened outside of New York City the Friday before Mother's Day. All right? This was back in the early 80s. That's how long ago it was. Almost 40 years ago. They lost over $5 million that weekend because it brought the entire switching system down. A certain part of New York didn't have access. If you don't know, you're all guys. You know, Mother's Day is a good guilt time. It's like when Catholics go to church on Christmas and Easter. It's the same kind of thing. Well, I got to call Mom today. It's Mother's Day. They couldn't. They didn't have their cell phones. They all had their rotary phones, and it didn't work. All right? So the reason I'm telling you that is they asked the guy, why didn't you do that? Because it'll never happen. Well, you know what? If I have to put in lines like this, even if somebody tells me it's redundant and it'll never happen, I don't care. I'm going to code defensively and just say if by some goofy chance this thing that you say will never happen happens, now we're covered. So if 99% of the time that isn't hit, I don't care. But you might say, okay, if it's never going to happen, why are you checking it first? Why wouldn't you check it last or whatever? Because if it is that way, if that 1 in a million thing happens, I want it to be set, period. So I'm sure that, yeah, maybe that'll be skipped, but by the time it gets down to right there, hours worked must have a consistent value in it. I'm assured of that, 100% assured. So my object is being kept in a consistent state. So, if we look our way through this again, I call this the no-arg constructor. There are no arguments. No-arg means there's nothing in the parentheses. All right? This next one I called a full R constructor because we have 8 pieces of data. And how many things do we have passed in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wait a minute, we have 8 pieces of data. We're only passing in 7 things. We're not passing in the gross pay. We have to calculate the gross pay. All right, so we're passing in the first name, the middle initial, the last name, the is union status, the employee number, the hours worked, and the hourly rate. Please look up on the screen here. Notice how all these names are different than these names? Everybody agree with that? The word this here, every single time, every one of these 8 is unnecessary. Notice it says, name can be simplified. Show potential fixes. Remove this. Okay? However, if I had done this, if I had called this right here, first name, all right, then I must do it like that. Everybody hear that? If my formal parameter that's right here is the same as the actual parameter, which we did up here, so if my actual parameter and my formal parameter have the same name, then I must use the word this. Notice how now it's dark blue? It's showing me that that's mandatory. All right, and that'll stick in here, and that'll be the same thing when we do Java a year from now. Well, I don't want that. I just want it to be easier for me, so I'm doing this. So what I'm telling you is you don't need the word this with the dot. So I could get rid of each one of those. I put it in there because otherwise I thought I'd forget to tell you about it. All right? But what I want you to understand is this. I mentioned before that when we do this, first name equals UFN right there. What that does is that automatically calls this. Automatically, without you having to do it. Why am I telling you that? Because when I do this one and I say this dot first name equals FN, it does the same thing. When I come in here and I say this dot middle init, that calls this. When I say this dot last name, it calls this. When I say this dot is union, it calls this. You get the idea? All right. That stuff is happening automatically. All right. You can't literally call this getter or this setter. You can't call that. But if you look up on the screen, anytime that you're setting a value equal to something like this, so anytime you've got one of those 8 pieces of data on the left-hand side of an equal sign, it's calling a set. Anytime that you come in and you are doing a write line where you're writing information, that's calling a get. All right? I just want you to understand that. That's what is happening. All right? So let's take a quick look. Again, if it's empty, set it to this. Otherwise, it's okay. If it's empty, well, look at this. Please look on the screen here. See this right here, this if? You won't know how to write that. Everybody in here knows how to write that. This is a shortcut. This says, again, if value is equal to double quote, set it to this, else set it to this. So what I'm showing you is this right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of code can be replaced with a single line of code. All right. Also, we may not have talked about this before. Please look up on the screen. This right here that you see in blue, that's the same thing as this. Some programmers like to put that in there because it explicitly shows I want to check for that string being empty. But I asked you the question before, and you all told me that's called the empty string. So what's the empty string? It literally checks for string.empty. So you can use either one of them. There is no advantage to using one over the other, except that's got about 12 keystrokes in it, and the other one has 2. But there really is no difference between you using one as opposed to you using the other. All right? Here we're checking, and if it equals this, we're setting it to that, and if it's not equal to this, we're setting it equal to that. Notice I can do it the opposite way too. I can check for it not being equal to something. So there's a lot of ways that you can write this. Look on the screen, please. This, because some of you are still making this mistake. This is for the union. Union's Boolean. What are the 2 possible values for a Boolean? True and false. So we have to say, if it's equal to true or if it's equal to false, then it's valid. Otherwise, set it to something else. Now, if I wanted to do the reverse, then I'd have to say, if not this and not that, but I'd have to make that then an and. All right, so you can check for inclusivity with an or non-inclusivity with an and. There's always a lot of different ways that you can write the same thing. Everyone's different as far as the way things should be written. You know, again, it's the same way if I were to say to you right now, you know, we're going someplace, that we're taking a ride. Some of you might say, you know what, I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna make a right on Highway A. I'm gonna go down and catch, what is that, 64, I think, and I'm gonna catch that over to 70. Other people would say, I hate going that way, so I'm just gonna make a left, okay, and I'm gonna go down all the way on there until I can catch 70 directly. You see what I'm saying? You both could get to the same place, but you'd get there by 2 different routes. And in the same way, that's one thing, I can show you how to do this stuff, but how you physically implement it is going to be up to you. And, you know, when somebody goes, and I will tell you right now, he's not here today, and I don't know if he did it himself or he looked online or he found something, and I'm not going to show it to you right now. Ryan did his test different than everybody else did it. But what he did was really frickin' cool. All right? And he missed one thing that was real small, so he got a 95. All right? But he did something where he wrote a lot less code than most of the rest of you did. All right? And again, did that mean, well, maybe he just got online and found a similar example? I hope not. All right? But, you know, even with that, is it possible for me to write a test or an assignment that you can't go online and find something close to it? Probably not. All right? I mean, if I ever see you doing that, I give you 0. I don't have any choice. All right? Just the same way, nobody's ever done this. This has not been an issue here, but from what I hear in other classes, it's been an issue where they've had somebody where they have a test, and you know, somebody, you know, they leave the internet up, and somebody goes and emails their best friend. They have had cases where they've had to follow people into the bathroom because, can I go to the bathroom? Yeah, and there's a friend in there. Yeah, can you help me with this? Well, I don't ever want to be that kind of cop. The last thing I ever want to do is follow any of you into a bathroom. I can tell you that for certain. All right. So here was the employee number. Again, we're checking first. Is it numeric? If it's not, we're just, in fact, right there, if you look at this, I really shouldn't have set this to 0. What should I have set that equal to? Shouldn't I have set that equal to the default? All right. If you would, please, on the handout I gave you, find your employee.cs. Find the employee.cs file, go down to line 156, and change that from empnum equals 0 to empnum equals def empnum. Right there. It's the file that's called employee.cs, and I guess your pages are probably not numbered because I had to print off in a different editor. All right? But find that. Now, please look up on the screen here. Even if you're still looking, please look on the screen. Would you agree that whether it's this or it's this, I'm doing the same thing? See that? I could make that into one complex condition. The program would run faster. I like leaving it the way that it is because I think it's easier to understand. If you don't agree with that, you could combine that into one condition. You could say if this or, and you could put that in there. Okay? Did everybody find that? I just want you to write good code, that's all. But because you putting that to 0 is not right. It really should be the default. I should have caught that. I didn't. All right? Notice I did catch it here. Default hours, default rate. Okay, so I missed one. All right, so here's the hours worked. Again, we try to parse it. If it was not parsable, we set it equal to the default hours, which was 40. If it's out of range, we set it to the default. Otherwise, it's within range. Does everybody understand this? Please look up on the screen. All right? This right here, that line, line 190, that says we entered a number between 0 and 84. This says we entered something non-numeric. This says we entered something numeric that's either less than 0 or it's greater than 84. If either one of these are the case, we're just resetting it to 40. Here, it's already valid. All right? And in the same way, we're doing the exact same thing right here. Exactly. So we are checking to make sure. So if it's here, it was non-numeric. If it was here, it was numeric, but it was either less than 0 or it was greater than 100. If it was here, it was a valid value to begin with. All right? I tried not to go too nuts with the comments, but I wanted there to be enough comments in here where you could understand what the hell was going on. All right? All right, if you would please, go down to the very bottom of this employee.cs file. Go down to the very bottom of it, because this is something we have not yet talked about. All right? This word right here will make more sense object-oriented wise when we get to the next chapter. All right? What everybody has automatically available to you in this language, in C# is a method called toString. You've used that before, right? You've taken a number, when you're printing it out, you give it the name of a variable with a number in it, .toString. Well, when you work with an object, which is what we're working with in here, the toString doesn't make any sense. What am I trying to tell you? If you don't do this, so let's say that I create an object. I go this. I say employee Jeff equals new employee. All right? You know as well as I do, that should set that up so that it says what? UFN, because there is no first name, star, ULN, false, 9999, 40, 25, 1000. Does that make sense? That's what should happen if I try to print that out the way it is. The problem is if I try to print it out the way it is, so if I come in here and I say this, right line, Jeff. If I don't do this, I'm going to get something that looks like this. And what that is that's the address in memory of where the beginning of that Jeff object exists. Because by default, C# doesn't understand toString when it works with an object. So what I have to do is I have to override the toString method. So if I call it for an object, I'm telling it what to do. So what am I telling it here? I am telling it, get rid of this, sorry. I'm telling it, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to say employee name. Then, what is this doing? That's calling the get for first name. This is calling the get for middle initial. This is calling the get for last name. This is calling the get for is union. But I want to make sure it prints out in a string format. This is calling the get for employee number. But I want to make sure it prints out in a string format. The get for hours worked. I want it in a string format, 2 decimal places. The hourly rate, 2-string format currency. The gross pay, 2-string format currency. Then I'm saying, after you put all that stuff into a string, just give me that string. Does that make sense? All right. And I'm not sure exactly what will even happen if I do this, but I want to try this. That is, I'm going to grab this whole routine. Okay, I think you're all agreeing with this. Grabbing the whole routine here, and I'm going to comment it out. See that? I commented the whole flipping routine out. Now I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to print. All right? It doesn't show me even anything. I'm surprised. In other languages, it will show you that address. Here, well, it's showing you what it knows, which is basically nothing. Except this, employee.employee, employee.employee. It's letting you know, it's smart enough to know that this is an employee. But that's all the smarts that's built into it. All right? So you have to override that 2-string method so the system has a clue over what it is we're trying to do. So it gives us that. And again, I'm not saying to you, hey, does that 100% make sense? But the idea is that hopefully if you go and type this in, you're probably going to make mistakes. And again, I'm saying this, what I'm saying right now, I don't think this is funny. It's not a joke. I'm hoping you make mistakes. That's how you learn. But like I said, I'd start by going over to this employee thing and literally just typing the whole frickin' thing in. Then I'd go back to the program and I would just do it one at a time. So from here, in main, I would just put in the first one and then do a right line. Just put in that. Then once it works, so in other words, with that one right there, once you do it and it looks like this, right there, okay, then I comment this out and then type in the next one and then run it again. And then if that one looks like this, that's good, and keep going like that. Because the only way you're going to understand this is if you do it that way, incrementally, where you just do one, then you do another, fine. Then once everything works, then uncomment everything and run it. Does that make sense? I'm doing this instead of going through one of the problems that I assigned to you, because this is a hell of a lot more extensive than the one. I mean, I went and wrote this. This is what I do when I'm sick. All right. So this is what I did on Friday. All right. I'm not going to say are there any questions. You might have a lot of questions that you don't even realize you have yet. But I'd like you to start typing this in now, regardless of where you are. Even if you're still doing this stuff for 6, 7, and 8. My hope is within an hour and a half, you can get most of it typed in. That way, if you've got questions, you can ask. All right? Yes?
How do we add in the second file?
Okay, the question is, how do you add in the second file? Let's suppose, this isn't the case, but let's suppose that we only had one file, this program file, okay? All you do is you go up to not your solution, but the name of your project right here. You right mouse click, you choose add, and you choose new item, and the first thing that should come up is class. Just rename it. So for you, you'll say employee right there, hit enter. That's it. So like I said, the rest of the period is now yours. This is due as part of your next assignment, but it's not due today. All right? Questions? All right. If I have time, I'll look and see if maybe we can do one of the problems that was assigned to you tomorrow. We'll see. Okay?